Greetings, listeners. I have a new life story that I've brought to life for you. Enjoy watching it.
When my parents yelled, "Get out!" at me on Thanksgiving, they had no idea that in 5 days I would be a multimillionaire. When my sister Amy and her husband Brad demanded I get out of their house for good, they didn't know that Grandpa William had left me an inheritance of $15 million. And when my mom was throwing my old backpack at me, telling me I was a disgrace to the family, she had no idea that very soon she would be begging for forgiveness. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how an ordinary family dinner turned into a disaster that turned out to be the greatest gift of fate for me. Before I continue, if you're interested in stories about family secrets and how money exposes people's true selves, please give me a like and subscribe, but only if you really want to know how it all ended. Write in the comments what city you are from and what time it is. I'm always interested to know who is following my story. Now let me go back to the day that completely changed my life. It all started on the morning of November 23rd, as I was editing photos in my tiny apartment in an old Austin neighborhood. Sunlight streamed through the only window, illuminating my workspace, an old desk I'd bought on sale and a laptop I'd been paying off for the second year. The apartment was a modest 35-square-foot studio with a bed adjacent to the kitchen alcove and a single chair that served as both a workspace and a sitting area. The walls were decorated with my best work: black and white portraits of local musicians, street scenes, landscapes of Austin neighborhoods. Photography wasn't just my profession, it was my passion, my way of seeing the world. Unfortunately, passion didn't pay the bills well. Most orders came through social media: weddings of young couples on a tight budget, portrait sessions of aspiring actors, the occasional commercial shoot for local cafes and stores. That day, I was working on a photo shoot for a small gallery that had commissioned images of their exhibits for their website. The work wasn't the most creative, but it paid for a week's worth of groceries. I was carefully editing each shot, adjusting the lighting and contrast, when the phone broke into a familiar tune. Mom. Of course it was Mom. I knew what the conversation was going to be about before I even picked up the phone. Thanksgiving in the Harper household was always a theatrical production where everyone had a part to play. The role of the successful daughter went to my older sister Amy, who married a successful lawyer, had 2 children, and lived in a luxurious house in an upscale neighborhood. I, on the other hand, was meant to be the disappointment of the family, the one who chose a frivolous profession and could not organize her life properly. "Caitlin, I hope you remember about dinner tonight." My mother's voice sounded without any greeting. "Of course I remember, Mom. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, as always." "Great. There's something I need to talk to you about." Linda Harper's voice had that familiar note of tension in it. "Try to be on time and, presentable. Brad's bringing his colleagues from the firm, very important people." I closed my eyes, anticipating what was to come. "And please try not to talk about your pictures this time. Remember last year when you bored everyone with stories about some street musicians? People came to relax, not to hear about your hobbies." "It's not a hobby, Mom, it's my job." "Caitlin," her mother's voice became sharper. "We've had this discussion. 22 years old and you still can't get a decent job. Look at Amy. When she was your age, she already had a stable position at the bank. She was dating Brad, planning a wedding, and you—" "What am I, Mom? You live in this tiny apartment, barely making ends meet, and you call it independence. It's time to grow up and accept reality." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. This conversation happened every few months with slight variations, but the point remained the same. I was a source of shame for the Harper family. "What do you want me to say, Mom? I want you to behave yourself. I don't argue with Brad when he gives you sound career advice. Don't roll your eyes when Amy talks about her kids. And for God's sake, don't mention Grandpa William." That last part was particularly harsh. Mentioning her grandfather always elicited a strange reaction from her parents, a mixture of irritation and some kind of anxiety. "What happened to Grandpa?" "Nothing happened. It's just, he spoiled you too much and it was bad for you. Gave you false hopes that you could live the life you wanted without thinking about the consequences. Grandpa William died 6 months ago, and I'm still reeling from the loss. He was the only one in the family who supported my passion for photography, the only one who didn't think my life choices were a mistake. He was the one who gave me my first professional camera for my 16th birthday, and he was the one who paid for my college photography courses despite my parents' objections. Grandpa never gave me false hopes, I said quietly. He just believed in what I was doing. Caitlin, I'm not going to argue with you. Just show up on time and try not to ruin the family party. We have enough problems as it is. She hung up, leaving me alone with the usual guilt and irritation. Every conversation with my mother ended the same way. I felt like a failure for not living up to the family's expectations. I went back to editing the photos, but I couldn't concentrate anymore. My thoughts kept returning to Grandpa William, to those rare moments when I felt understood and accepted. He told me stories about starting his construction business from scratch, how important it is to pursue something that brings joy, even if it doesn't bring in a lot of money. Money comes and goes, Katie, he said, using my childhood nickname. But talent and passion stay with you forever. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. If only he knew how right he was about money coming and going, and how important his words about not letting others determine your worth would prove to be. The rest of the day went by with the usual business. I finished up the gallery photos, sent the client previews, and got approval. The small joy of a job well done slightly improved my mood. Then I spent a long time choosing what to wear to a family dinner. My closet was modest, but I knew that my mom would pay attention to every detail and find a reason to criticize. In the end, I settled on a simple black dress I'd bought on sale a year ago and the only pair of decent shoes. Her makeup was minimal, her hair gathered into a neat bundle. Nothing to get caught up in, nothing too flashy or flashy. Before leaving, I took another look at my pictures on the walls. A portrait of an elderly jazz musician with hands riddled with wrinkles, but with young, lively eyes. A shot of a rainy street where the reflections of neon signs turned into abstract paintings. A sunset over Lake Austin when the sky blazed orange and pink. These works reminded me of who I am. Not a disappointment to my family, not a loser who can't get a normal job, an artist who sees beauty where others pass by. I took my bag and keys, not knowing that I would return to this apartment already a different person. A man who will never again apologize for who he is. My parents' house in the upscale Westlake neighborhood looked as immaculate as ever. A perfectly mowed lawn, beds of fall flowers, a 2-story red brick structure with white columns that were supposed to give it a solid look. Robert and Linda Harper had spent years creating the exterior image of a successful American family, and every detail of this house screamed status and prosperity. Brad's car was already in the driveway, a shiny black Lexus that he changed every 2 years to maintain his image as a successful lawyer. Amy's white Mercedes that Brad had given her for her last birthday was parked nearby. My old 98-year-old Honda Civic looked like a stray dog at a dog show. I parked far away from their cars so as not to spoil the picture of family prosperity, and sat behind the wheel for a few minutes, gathering my courage. Every visit to this house required mental preparation. There were special rules here, and breaking any of them entailed a lecture on how to live right. The front door opened before I could even approach. Mom, of course, had been watching my arrival from the living room window. "Caitlin, finally," she said, giving me an appraising look. "The dress is nice, but the shoes could be better." "Hi, Mom," I replied, habitually ignoring the criticism. "How are you?" "Everything's fine. Amy's here with the kids. Brad's telling Dad about his new business. It's a very interesting story about corporate law. You should listen to it. You might learn something useful about real work." We walked into the spacious living room where the whole family was gathered. Amy was sitting on the couch, elegant and impeccable in her designer suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. Her children, 8-year-old Ethan and 6-year-old Sophia, were fussing beside her. Brad stood by the fireplace with a glass of wine in his hand, telling his father something, who listened with a look of deep respect on his face. "Caitlin!" Amy got up from the couch and hugged me. For a moment, I thought she was genuinely happy to see me, but then she pulled away and added, You've lost weight. I hope you're eating well. I'm fine, I answered briefly, realizing that the question was not out of concern, but more as a way of hinting at my modest financial situation. Brad turned from the fireplace and extended his hand to shake mine like a business partner. Caitlin, how are you doing? Still doing photography? Yes, still, I replied, sensing the condescension in his voice. That's great. A hobby is important for your mental health, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Though, of course, at your age, you should be thinking about something more stable. Dad came over and patted me on the shoulder. Caitlin, honey, it's so good that you could come. We were just discussing a very interesting merger case with Brad. It might be good for you to hear how serious people work. I nodded, sitting down in a chair away from the main group. Amy's kids were playing with expensive toys on the carpet, occasionally running up to their mom for attention. Sophia was showing me her new doll, and I genuinely admired her beautiful dress, which made the girls smile happily. Sophia, don't bother Aunt Kathleen, Amy said softly. She probably had better things to do than play with children's toys. No, I'm interested, I objected, but Sophia had already moved away from her mother, sensing that her enthusiasm was misplaced. Brad continued his story about corporate law, and my parents listened as attentively as if he were reciting the secrets of the universe. Every phrase he spoke elicited nods of approval, every joke a laugh. Amy complimented her husband's story with details about how difficult it was to be the wife of a successful lawyer, how many social events they had to attend, what a responsibility it was. And remember the charity auction last month? Amy told me. Brad bought the painting for $8,000. Sure, it was for a good cause, but it still felt good to help a children's foundation. $8,000, Mom marveled. You guys are so good. It's so important to help those less fortunate. I kept silent, realizing that no one was interested in my opinion about charity. $8,000 was my income for a good 6 months, and it would have been unthinkable for me to spend such a sum on a painting. But here it was taken for granted. What's new with you, Kathleen? My father asked, clearly uncomfortable with my silence for too long. I'm working on a project for a local gallery, I answered. I'm shooting an exhibit of emerging artists. Emerging artists? Brad asked with a slight chuckle. Do they even pay for that kind of work? They do, I said shortly. Well, that's good, Mom interjected. The important thing is that something at least brings in some income, and that we were already worried that you are completely... She didn't finish, but the meaning was clear. That I was down, that I was living in poverty, that I was embarrassing the family with my inability to get on in life as I should. Speaking of income, Amy said, we have some news. Brad has been promoted to senior partner. His salary will now almost double. Congratulations! The parents exclaimed almost in unison. That's wonderful, Mom added. We are so proud of you. Can you imagine senior partner at the age of 28? That's an exceptional success. Brad smiled modestly as he accepted the congratulations. Amy talked about how they planned to spend the extra money, a vacation in Europe, a new car, perhaps an expansion of the house. And maybe a third child? Mom asked with hope in her voice. We haven't decided yet, Amy replied with a laugh. But who knows? We definitely have the financial capacity for a large family now. I sat and listened to their plans, feeling like a spectator in a theater where a play about someone else's life was being played out. The ease with which they talked about thousands of dollars, promotions, and purchases seemed unreal to me. I lived in a world where every dollar counted, where an unexpected bill could be a disaster. Caitlin, how are you doing with your personal life? Amy asked, turning her attention back to me. Are you seeing anyone? No, I answered honestly. That's too bad, Mom sighed. At your age, Amy was already engaged. It's understandable, though, that first you need to sort out your career, find a stable job, and then think about a family. Mommy's right, Amy said. Men appreciate women who can provide for themselves. Photography is, of course, creativity, but for a serious relationship, you need a serious profession. And what do you consider a serious profession? I couldn't stand it. Well, for example, The same banking, where I worked before I had children, or law, like Brad, medicine, engineering, management in a large company, something with career advancement and a steady income. So any job that makes a lot of money? Not just money, Brad countered. Social status, respect from colleagues, the opportunity to influence important decisions. Photography is good for fun, but hardly anyone would see a photographer as an equal in serious society. I felt a familiar wave of anger and resentment rising in me. Every family dinner turned into the same interrogation, where I had to justify my life choices. Grandpa William was perceptive, I said quietly. There was an awkward silence. Mentioning Grandpa always elicited a strange reaction from the family. Grandpa spoiled you, Mom said sharply. Instilled the false notion that talent was more important than practicality. Look where it got you. What did it lead to? I asked. At 22, you're living in a tiny apartment, barely making ends meet with no prospects for the future, Mom said harshly. If Grandpa were alive, he would have realized that his advice was wrong. Mom! I exclaimed. Mom, what? I'm telling the truth. It's time to stop living in illusions and come down to earth. Brad coughed, obviously sensing the tension. Caitlin, we don't want to hurt you, he said in a conciliatory tone. We're just concerned about your future. I have contacts at various companies. I can put in a good word, help you get a decent job. What kind of job? I asked. Well, an administrative position, assistant manager, something like that. The starting salary is small, but there are prospects for growth. The main thing is stability and a social package. Thanks, but no. Why not? Amy was surprised. It's a great opportunity, because I don't want to work in an office. But what do you want? Dad intervened. A lifetime of random jobs? Live in a rented apartment? No savings, no health insurance, no retirement plan? I want to do what I love. Loving your job doesn't pay the bills, my mom said. It's time to grow up and accept reality. Amy's children played on the carpet, occasionally glancing at the adults who were talking louder and more tensely. Sophia came up to me and asked quietly, Aunt Kathleen, why is everyone angry? They're not, dear, I replied, stroking her hair. They're just discussing adult issues. Sophia, go play with your brother, Amy said, pulling her daughter away from the awkward conversation. Mom got up and headed for the kitchen. Dinner is almost ready. Robert, help me set the table. Caitlin, I hope you'll consider Brad's offer. This could be your chance to turn your life around. I stayed in the living room with Amy and Brad, feeling cornered. Every word they said, every look they gave me said that I was a stranger here, that my lifestyle was wrong, that I was a disappointment to the family. You know, Caitlin, Amy said more gently, we do care about you. You're our family, and we want you to be happy. And you don't think I'm happy? Honestly? Yeah, you live from paycheck to paycheck. You have no stability, no plans for the future. It can't last forever. Maybe my understanding of happiness is different from yours. Maybe, Brad agreed. But happiness without financial security is an illusion. Sooner or later, reality would set in. I didn't argue further. These people lived in a world where success was measured by the size of a house and the make of a car, where the prestige of a job was more important than personal satisfaction. It was pointless to explain to them that photography gave me something that no office job could. Mom called everyone to the table, and we moved to the dining room where the traditional holiday dinner was served. Turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie. Everything looked perfect, like a picture from a family traditions magazine. I sat in my usual seat at the far end of the table, next to the kids, while the adults discussed serious topics. Ethan was telling me about his progress in school. Sophia was showing me how beautifully she could fold a napkin. The kids were the only ones in this house who accepted me for who I was, without judgment and without trying to change me. Dinner turned into another demonstration of the family hierarchy, where I occupied the lowest rung. At the festive table, the conversation at first went on about neutral topics: the weather, the children's plans for school vacations, the news of the neighborhood. My mother talked about the neighbor's kitchen renovation. My father shared his impressions of his last golf game. I ate turkey in silence and hoped that the evening would pass without serious conflicts. But that hope was naive. In the Harper family, any gathering sooner or later turned into a session of collective condemnation of my lifestyle. Brad's question about my plans for the winter was the first alarm bell. "Caitlin, do you have any big projects for the coming months?" he asked, cutting up the meat. "A few weddings, a portrait shoot for the local theater," I answered cautiously. "Theater?" Mom asked. "I hope they're paying you well." "They pay what they can. It's a non-profit organization." "Non-profit," Brad repeated with a slight chuckle. "So it's practically free?" "Not free, just not very much." "Caitlin," Dad interjected, "do you realize that winter is a slow season for weddings? How do you plan to cover the costs?" "I'll manage somehow," I replied, feeling the conversation take a nasty turn. "I'll manage somehow isn't a plan," Amy said. "That's hoping for a miracle. What if the orders don't come in? What if the camera breaks? What if you get sick and can't work?" "Amy's right," said Mom. "You don't have a financial safety net. You're living day to day like a teenager. I don't live one day at a time. I just don't obsess about money." "Not obsessing about money?" Brad put down his fork and looked at me with a puzzled expression. "Caitlin, you live in the real world. Money isn't a fixation. It's a necessity. Rent, food, clothing, medicine all cost money. I pay rent, buy food and clothes." "Barely," Mom remarked. "Look at you. That's the same dress you wore a year ago for your father's birthday." "What's wrong with it? It's a good dress. Why buy a new one?" "It's not about the dress," Amy interjected. "It's that you just don't have the money for a new one. You cut back on everything, deny yourself the basics, and call it freedom from materialism. Isn't it?" "It's self-deception," Brad said stiffly. "You romanticize poverty because you're afraid to admit you're on the wrong path." "Wrong for whom?" "For any reasonable person," Dad replied. "Caitlin, you're a smart girl, educated. You have every opportunity to succeed in a normal profession. Why do you persist in this hobby of photography?" "It's not a hobby. It's my job." "A job should provide a decent living," Mom said. "What do you have? A tiny apartment, an old car, a constant lack of money. It's not living, it's surviving." The children at the table fell silent, sensing the tension. Sophia stopped eating and listened attentively to the adults, though she hardly understood the essence of the conversation. "I like my life," I said more quietly. "I do what I love." "You can do what you love in your spare time," Brad objected. "Like a hobby, but to base your whole life on it is infantilizing." "So all artists, musicians, writers are infantile people? Those who make serious money with it, no. But there are only a few of them. The rest either have other jobs or live off relatives. And I live at my own expense. On the edge of poverty," Mom added. "Caitlin, we're tired of worrying about you. Every time the phone rings, I think you're going to ask to borrow money." "I've never asked you for money." "Not yet. But what happens when age takes its toll? Who's going to want to hire a 40-year-old wedding photographer? You'll have no serious experience, no connections, no savings." I felt my cheeks burning with resentment and anger. Maybe I should just believe in myself. "Believing in yourself without a real reason is hubris," Amy said sharply. "Caitlin, you're not a photography genius. You're not bad at taking pictures, but the world is full of people who are good at painting or singing or writing. That doesn't mean they all have to give up their normal jobs for art." "How do you know if I'm a genius or not?" "Because geniuses get recognized," Brad interjected. "Their work is bought for big bucks. They get celebrity shoots. They get invited to prestigious galleries. And you shoot weddings and local theaters. Everybody's got to start somewhere." "Caitlin, you're 22 years old," Dad said tiredly. "How much more do you plan to start? At your age, people are already building careers, not looking for themselves. Grandpa used to say—" "Enough about Grandpa," Mom interrupted me abruptly. "He filled your head with romantic nonsense about following your dreams, and look where it got you. He's been in business all his life, building houses, making real money, and for some reason, he convinced you that you could live on air and creative impulses." "He understood me. He spoiled you," Amy exclaimed. He gave you false confidence that you were special, that you didn't have to live by the usual rules. But you're not special, Kathleen. You're just a normal girl who needs to get a normal job and build a normal life. Like you? Yeah, like me. Amy raised her voice. I have a house, a family, financial stability. I can afford nice clothes, vacations, quality medicine for my kids. What can you afford? Freedom. What freedom? Brad laughed. The freedom to make every dollar count? Freedom to refuse to have fun because there's no money for it? Freedom to worry about tomorrow? Freedom to do the things I like to do. At the expense of what? Mom asked. Through constant stress? Uncertainty? Caitlin, it's time to come down to earth. What do you suggest? Drop everything and go to work in an office? That's exactly what we're suggesting, Dad said. Brad can get you a job with a good company. It's an entry-level position, but it's a growth position. In a few years, you could buy a decent apartment, a car, start saving for retirement. And forget about photography? Leave it as a hobby, Brad shrugged. On weekends, on vacation, a lot of people do that. I don't want to live like that. Then how do you want to live? Amy asked irritably. Always a young artist who shoots weddings for pennies and thinks she's free? I want to live an honest life. I want to do what I believe in. Faith doesn't pay the bills, Mom repeated, and we can't watch you ruin your life anymore. I'm not ruining my life. I'm building it. You're kidding yourself, Amy exclaimed. You're living under the illusions your grandfather gave you. He had no idea what it was like to work for a pittance. He worked his whole life. He was a businessman. He made real money. And he made you believe that money doesn't matter. It's hypocrisy, pure and simple. Don't talk about Grandpa like that. Does it really hurt? Brad leaned back in his chair. The old man filled your head with fairy tales while he lived in luxury. Shut up! Caitlin, Mom shouted sharply. Don't talk to Brad like that. Can he insult Grandpa's memory? He's telling the truth, Dad said. The painful truth, but the truth. Grandpa spoiled you too much. You all hated him. We loved him, said Mother, but we didn't approve of the way he raised you. He gave you unrealistic ideas about life. What unrealistic ideas? That you should do what you love? That doing what you love should be the only thing you do, Amy said. That you can ignore practical considerations for the sake of creative ambition. I'm not ignoring practical considerations. Then tell me how you plan to get through this winter, Brad demanded, specifically month by month with numbers. I'll find orders. Where? With whom? For how much? I don't know yet. Exactly, Mom exclaimed. You don't know. You're living on hope. Everyone goes through rough patches. We all do, but not everyone's life is normal, Dad said. Caitlin, we can't pretend everything's normal anymore. What does that mean? It means it's time to make a decision, Amy said firmly. Either you accept Brad's help and find a normal job, or you stop counting on us for support, Dad finished. I felt the world around me change. There was a determination in my parents' and sisters' voices that I hadn't heard before. What do you mean? I mean no help, Mom said. No loans, no birthday presents, no family dinners until you come to your senses. You're giving me an ultimatum? We're trying to save you from yourself, Amy replied, before it's too late. And if I refuse, then that's your choice, Brad said coldly. But don't expect your family to watch you suffer and feel sorry for you. Misery? What else do you call what you're doing? Mom asked, condemning yourself to poverty and loneliness out of pride. It's not pride, it's principles. Principles that lead nowhere, said Dad. Caitlin, we're tired of worrying about you, tired of blushing in front of acquaintances when they ask about your affairs. Are you ashamed of me? We're ashamed of your choices, Amy replied. Ashamed that our daughter lives worse than many homeless people. Amy, I exclaimed. Amy, what? It's true. You rent a miserable little house, drive a wreck, and call it a decent life. The children at the table sat wide-eyed. Sophia began to sob, not understanding why the adults were yelling at each other. Enough, I said, getting up from the table. Stop it in front of the children. Kids need to see what bad life choices lead to, Brad said coldly. Are you using the kids as an argument? I'm explaining to them the reality of life. What reality? That you have to sell out for money? That you have to be a responsible adult? Shouted Amy. Mom, Dad, Aunt Kathleen, don't fight, cried Sophia. See what you've done? Mom blamed me. You've upset the baby with your selfishness. My selfishness? You're the ones who attacked me as a family. We've been trying to talk you out of it, Dad said. But you won't listen. Because you're wrong. Wrong? Mom exploded. Are we wrong to say that at 22 it's time to have a stable job? Wrong to worry about your future? You're not worried about me. You're worried about what the neighbors will say. Caitlin, Father shouted sharply. Caitlin, what? It's true. You're ashamed of me. Ashamed that your youngest daughter doesn't look like your eldest. I'm not ashamed, I'm hurt, Amy cried through her tears. It hurts to see you ruin your life. I'm not ruining it. Yes, you are, yelled Mom. And if you won't listen to reason, then get out of here. Get out and don't come back until you get wise. There was a deafening silence. Even the children stopped crying, shocked by their grandmother's words. What? I asked quietly. You heard me, Mom said, breathing hard. Get out. We don't want to see any more of your pathetic attempts to justify your worthlessness. Linda, Dad tried to intervene. No, Mom said. That's enough. Let her go and live the life she wants, but without us. I stood at the table, unable to believe what was happening. The family I grew up around had just kicked me out of the house. Really? I asked. You're kicking me out? We're setting you free, Brad said coldly. Now you can live your beautiful, free life without our interference. I looked at each of them. At my mom, her face red with anger. At Dad, who avoided my gaze. At Amy, who pressed her lips into a thin line. At Brad with his smug smile. Okay, I said quietly. Okay, I'll leave. I grabbed my bag and headed for the exit. I turned around at the door. Just know, I said, when I'm successful, don't count on me coming back. When you're successful, Mom snorted. Dream on. I walked out of the house where I spent my childhood and realized I would never go back there again. The 5 days after the family disaster passed in a strange daze. I would wake up in my small apartment, and for a while I couldn't remember why I felt so empty inside. Then the memories came crashing over me in a wave. My mother's screams, Amy's cold face, Brad's smug smile, my father's words that they were tired of worrying about me. The sound of my parents' door slamming shut behind me was still ringing in my ears. For the first 2 days, I barely left the apartment. I canceled the gallery shoot, citing illness, and just lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The phone was silent. No one from the family tried to contact me to apologize or at least find out how I was doing. That silence spoke to me more than any words could. They had truly disowned me. By the 3rd day, the realization came that life had not stopped. Utility bills didn't disappear, rent didn't go away, food didn't appear in the refrigerator. I had to work, earn money, prove to myself that I could manage without family support. Although, to be honest, that support was always more of a moral burden than a real help. I went back to work, but it was hard to concentrate. While shooting the wedding of a young couple from the suburbs, I looked at the happy faces of the bride and groom, their parents hugging and crying with joy, and felt a sharp pain in my chest. These people had a family that supported their choice, rejoiced in their happiness. And I had no one else. The only person who could understand me was Grandpa William. But he died 6 months ago, taking with him all his wise counsel and unconditional love. Sometimes I thought that if he had been alive, the family scandal would never have gotten this bad. Grandpa knew how to find words that calmed even the most acute conflicts. On the morning of November 28th, as I was editing photos from that wedding, an unfamiliar number called. Normally, I didn't answer calls from unknown numbers, too many scammers and pushy salespeople. But something made me pick up the phone. Caitlin Harper, a male voice with a slight Texas accent asked. Yes, that's me. My name is Gerald Mitchell, and I am the attorney and executor of the will of your grandfather, William Harper. I need to meet with you about an estate matter. Heart palpitations. Grandfather's estate? We already attended the reading of the will 6 months ago. Grandpa left my parents a house and some savings, Amy shares in his construction company, me a sapphire ring that belonged to my grandmother. A symbolic keepsake, nothing more. I'm sorry, but the will has already been read. Ms. Harper, there are additional documents that were to be delivered to you personally 6 months after Mr. Harper's death. That was his direct order. Could you come to my office this afternoon? I said yes, driven by curiosity and a vague hope. Perhaps my grandfather had left me some other family heirlooms or records, something that would remind me of a time when I had someone in my life who believed in me unconditionally. The lawyer's office was located in downtown Austin, in one of those glass buildings I used to photograph for architecture magazines. Gerald Mitchell appeared to be a man in his 50s with graying temples and attentive eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. His office was furnished in classic style, dark wood, leather chairs, shelves of legal literature. Ms. Harper, thank you for coming. Your grandfather was my client for over 20 years, and I can tell you that he was very thorough in the details of his will. The lawyer opened the massive safe in the corner of the office and pulled out a thick file of documents. 6 months ago, we read the bulk of the will, as Mr. Harper had requested, but he left special instructions regarding an additional inheritance to be given to you personally after 6 months. Mr. Mitchell spread some papers before him and coughed solemnly. According to William Harper's last will, the following assets are to be transferred to his granddaughter, Kathleen Harper. First, an investment portfolio worth $12,400,000. Second, a deposit account in the Bank of Austin in the amount of $2,600,000. The total inheritance is $15 million. I stared at the lawyer, not believing my ears. The words sounded like a foreign language, the meaning of which my brain refused to perceive. I'm sorry, how much? $15 million, Mr. Mitchell repeated calmly, as if it were $15. The world around me froze. The sounds of street traffic outside the window became distant and unreal. I could feel my heart pounding somewhere in my throat, and my hands began to tremble. This is a mistake. Grandpa couldn't have that much money. I assure you there's no mistake. Mr. Harper was a very successful businessman. His construction company operated all over Texas, and he invested in real estate and stocks. At the time of his death, he was worth nearly $30 million. But then why did he leave his parents and Amy so little? Because that was his wish. Mr. Harper explained his motives very clearly in the letter he asked me to give you with the estate papers. The lawyer handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandfather's familiar handwriting. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely open the envelope. Inside were 3 sheets of paper written in neat handwriting. I would recognize those letters among 1,000 others. Grandpa wrote me cards for every birthday, notes of advice when I doubted my path. My dear Katie, if you're reading this letter, it means it's been 6 months since my death and you already know about the inheritance. I can imagine your surprise. I'm sure you must think it's some kind of mistake or a prank. But no, darling, it's absolutely serious. I left you the bulk of my fortune for several reasons. First, because you're the only one in our family who doesn't measure success by the size of her bank account. You chose a profession that brings you joy despite financial difficulties. That takes courage that your parents and sister don't have. Secondly, because I've seen how they treat you. Constant rebuke, trying to remake you in their own image, shame for your choices. It's wrong, Katie. Family is supposed to support, not break. 3, because they don't need my money. Robert and Linda have a house, retirement savings, a stable life. Amy has a rich husband and a secure future. All you have is talent and dreams. I know your parents are going to be against this decision. They'll say you're not ready for that kind of money, that you'll waste it. Don't listen to them. You're a smart girl, and I believe in your ability to use your inheritance wisely. This money isn't just a gift. It's an investment in your future and an opportunity to prove that talent is more important than money and that dreams come true for those who don't give up. Live your life the way you think is right. Take up photography, travel, help other creative people find their way. And remember, you don't owe anyone anything, especially those who didn't believe in you. I'm proud of you, Katie. I always will be. Your Grandpa William. P.S. There's a deed to a penthouse in downtown Austin in the bank safe. It's yours, too. Think about moving. You deserve to live a beautiful life. I finished the letter and felt tears stream down my cheeks. Grandpa knew. He knew how my family treated me. He knew the constant pressure and reproach. And he decided to give me something I never expected. Complete independence. $15 million. A sum that seemed unreal, fantastic. I could buy my own house, professional equipment, open a studio, travel the world in search of unique footage. I could do only those projects that I was interested in without thinking about whether there was enough money for rent. But most importantly, I never again had to apologize for my life choices. Never again did I have to listen to lectures about photography not being a real job. Never again did I have to feel like a failure at family dinners. Ms. Harper, do you need time to absorb the information? The lawyer asked delicately. I looked up from the letter and saw understanding in his gaze. Surely he had witnessed such scenes more than once when an inheritance changed a person's life dramatically. Is it true? Did I really become a multimillionaire? Absolutely true. The paperwork has been prepared. All that's left is your signature. After that, the money will be transferred to your account within 3 business days. And the family, do they know? No. According to your grandfather's will, information about the additional inheritance must remain confidential until you decide to disclose it yourself. I nodded, still not fully believing what was happening. In the pocket of my jeans was the last $30, all I had left until my next order. In a few days, I would have 7 zeros in my account. Mr. Mitchell explained the formalities involved in setting up an inheritance. Taxes, investment funds, asset management, words that had seemed abstract to me before now took on a very concrete meaning. He recommended a financial advisor to help me manage my money wisely and a lawyer to deal with tax issues. I signed the documents, feeling my life change irrevocably with each signature. No more worrying about having enough money for groceries. No more turning down interesting projects because of low pay. No more apologizing to my family for my wrong life. As I left the lawyer's office, I stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, not knowing where to go next. Ordinary life seemed unreal. Return to the tiny apartment and continue editing photos as if nothing had changed? Or immediately start a new life, the life of a man who could afford everything? Grandpa mentioned a penthouse downtown. I needed to see it, to realize the magnitude of the gift he'd left me. I hailed a cab the first time in months I'd allowed myself that luxury without counting every dollar. The address on the paperwork led me to one of Austin's most prestigious apartment complexes, a 40-story tower of glass and steel that overlooked the entire city. I was greeted in the lobby by a concierge in an impeccable suit. The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors, floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows, a terrace overlooking Lake Austin, designer furniture that cost more than I made in a year. It was a place I could only dream of while leafing through architecture magazines. But the most amazing find was a room my grandfather had clearly set up just for me. A professional photo lab with state-of-the-art equipment, studio lights, and backgrounds for taking pictures. On the wall hung a note, "For my talented granddaughter, create, Katie." He knew. Grandpa knew I would be here sooner or later and had prepared everything I needed for my work in advance. Even from beyond the grave, he continued to care for me more than the living family. I sat down in a chair by the panoramic window and looked out at the city spread out below. Somewhere out there, in their prosperous homes, lived my parents, Amy and Brad. They had no idea what had happened today. They didn't know that the girl they thought was a loser and kicked out of their home had just become richer than all of them combined. Grandpa didn't just give me money. He gave me the strength to never again bow my head to those who didn't appreciate me. gave me the opportunity to live life on my own terms and prove that he was right to believe in me. But first I had to decide what to do with this information. Should I tell my family? Or wait for them to find out for themselves? Or maybe give them the lesson they deserved for years of humiliation? I pulled out my phone and saw a missed call from my mom. First time in 5 days. I wondered what had caused her to break her silence. For the first 3 days after seeing the lawyer, I lived in a state of unreality. I'd wake up in the morning in my tiny apartment, stare at the cracked wallpaper, and think that yesterday's visit to Mr. Mitchell had been a dream. Then I'd pick up the copies of the inheritance papers, and reality would come crashing down on me all over again. $15 million, penthouse downtown, total financial independence. I hadn't told anyone what was happening. My few acquaintances in the photography industry would have noticed the change in behavior, and my wedding photography colleagues were hardly interested in my personal life enough to ask questions. Besides, Grandpa's letter made it clear the information was to remain secret until I decided to reveal it myself. I spent the first 2 days reviewing financial documents and planning for the future. Grandpa's investment portfolio was well designed, stocks of large companies, bonds, real estate in different states. Even without additional investments, these assets brought an income that exceeded the salary of an average American. I never had to worry about money again. On Wednesday, I finally decided to visit the penthouse again to take a close look at everything. The concierge greeted me as a full owner, and the feeling still felt surreal. The apartment was over 300 square feet, overlooking all of Austin, with furnishings that cost more than my annual income. I spent most of my time in the dark room my grandfather had set up, especially for me. Professional cameras of the latest models, studio lighting, computers with powerful video cards for image processing, equipment I could only dream of. On one of the shelves was an album with my childhood photos and a note. "I've kept all your work since I was 8 years old, proud of every frame." By Wednesday evening, I decided not to rush the move. The paperwork wasn't completely finalized, and most importantly, I needed time to reflect on what had happened. In addition, I wanted to enjoy the last days of my old life before plunging into a new reality. On the morning of Thursday, December 2nd, everything changed. The phone rang at 7:30 in the morning. Mom. It was the first call from anyone in the family in the 5 days since the scandal. I stared at the name on the screen for a long time, wondering if I should answer. Curiosity won out. "Caitlin?" My mother's voice sounded strange, in an artificially cheerful tone. "Good morning, dear. How are you?" "Fine," I answered cautiously. "What's wrong?" "Nothing much. I just wanted to see how you were doing. My dad and I are a little stressed out after our conversation at Thanksgiving. A little stressed out? After they kicked me out of the house yelling, 'Get out!'" "Oh, I see. Caitlin, would you mind coming over today? There's something we need to talk about. It's nothing serious, just family stuff." "What kind of stuff? It's not really convenient to talk on the phone. It's better if we meet." "You understand?" I didn't understand, but I agreed. Something in my mother's voice was unsettling. Too strained politeness, too obvious an attempt to seem like a normal, caring mother. By noon, the picture was clearer. Mr. Mitchell had called to say that information about the inheritance had somehow leaked into local business circles. It turned out that one of the bank clerks who had processed the transfer of funds knew Brad from his professional life. Naturally, the news that the youngest daughter of the Harper family suddenly became a multimillionaire spread with the speed of wildfire. Unfortunately, confidentiality was breached, the lawyer apologized. The bank has already launched an internal investigation, but the information has already gone public. Does that mean the family knows? I'm afraid so. Mr. Brad Richardson called the bank an hour ago and demanded confirmation of the information. He wasn't told anything official, of course, but I see. Thanks for the heads up. I hung up, and for a second I felt panicked. They know. They know I'm no longer the poor relative to be humiliated and kicked out of the house. They know that all their words about my worthlessness and inability to make a life for myself have turned out to be nothing. The phone rang again. Amy, Caitlin, we need to talk immediately. About what? Don't play dumb. You know exactly what it is. Come to your parents' house. Now. What if I don't want to? Caitlin, this is a family matter. You can't just disappear after news like this. After what news? A pause. Amy realized I wasn't going to make it easy for her. After the news about Grandpa's inheritance. Yeah, we know, and we want to have a family discussion about it. Family? I couldn't help but laugh. Like 5 days ago? Caitlin, please. We all said too much that day. Emotions ran high. But you realize we're a family, and these things have to be done together. What kind of issues? Issues of inheritance, distribution, family assets. You don't think you can just take it all for yourself, do you? That's it. The point of the conversation. The money. Amy, Grandpa left a will. It's very specific. Wills can be contested if you have grounds. And there are grounds. What grounds? You were too close to Grandpa. You may have influenced him inappropriately in the last years of his life. It's called coercion to make a will. I felt a wave of icy anger roll down my spine. So you're accusing me of coercing my grandfather? I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just stating the facts. Grandpa left you a fabulous amount of money, and the rest of the family left you pennies. It looks suspicious. It looks fair. Fair? Amy's voice got sharper. Fair when a daughter gets less than her granddaughter? When people who've worked their whole lives and built a family get left out? Amy, you got stock in Grandpa's company. That's good money, too. But don't compare $1.5 million worth of stock to a $15 million inheritance, so they already know the exact amount. The information really spread quickly. What do you suggest? I suggest we come and discuss a fair redistribution. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. $5 million would be enough to ensure your livelihood. What about the other 10? The rest should be divided between my parents and me. Fair enough. What fairness, Amy? Family justice, human justice. Mom and Dad worked their whole lives raising us, taking care of the family. I've got 2 kids who need an education, a future. What about you? You live alone. You don't support anyone. You're not responsible for anyone. So I'm less worthy of an inheritance because I don't have children? You're less in need of that kind of money because your needs are more modest. Amy's logic was amazing. First, they criticized my modest lifestyle for years, and now they were using it as an argument against inheritance rights. Amy, Grandpa decided who he wanted to inherit and how much to leave. He had his reasons. What reasons? That you were his favorite? That I was the only one who didn't try to change his mind about how to live his life. Nonsense! We all loved Grandpa. Loved his money. Caitlin, how dare you? How dare you ask for a redistribution of the inheritance? Grandpa was in his right mind when he made his will. He knew what he was doing. He was an old man. Old people can be influenced. So I did coerce him. I didn't say coerced, but you definitely influenced him. All that talk about creativity, about money not being the most important thing, you indoctrinated him with your views. That's terrible. I was talking to Grandpa and sharing my thoughts. Don't be cynical, Caitlin. This is serious money we're talking about. It's about the future of an entire family. The future of the family that kicked me out of the house 5 days ago? Pause. Amy clearly didn't expect me to bring up recent events. We were all emotional. We said some things we didn't mean, but you realize that doesn't negate family obligations. What kind of commitment? A commitment to help each other, to support each other, to share. Sharing what's rightfully mine? Sharing what's yours by accident. Not by accident, Amy. Grandpa left me that money on purpose. I heard voices on the phone. Apparently, Amy wasn't alone. Caitlin, Brad wants to talk to you. I don't want to talk to Brad. Caitlin! A man's voice came through the phone. It's Brad. I think we should meet and discuss the situation in a calm, mature manner. Discuss what? The legal aspects of the will, possibilities of revision, options for a family agreement. Brad, the will is written in accordance with the law. It can't be revised just because you don't like the distribution. Any will can be challenged if there are grounds. And there are grounds. What grounds? Unequal distribution of assets, violation of equitable inheritance, possible coercion by the testator. Brad, you're a lawyer. You know very well that coercion has to be proven, and unequal distribution is every person's right. There's a right, but there's also a moral obligation to the family. What moral obligation does a man who's been kicked out of his home have? Pause again. I guess they didn't expect me to keep coming back to this point. Caitlin, we're willing to admit that we jumped to conclusions. Emotions, stress, misunderstandings. It happens in every family. The important thing is that we can fix it. Fix it? Repair the family relationship. Find a compromise that works for everyone. A compromise like redistributing the inheritance, among other things. Caitlin, $15 million is a lot of money. That's more than one person needs for a lifetime. Isn't it reasonable to share it with the people who raised you, who educated you? The same man who raised me and educated me left me that money. Apparently, he thought I deserved it. William was a wonderful man, but in recent years he's become too sentimental. You managed to become his favorite, and he made an emotional decision. An emotional decision that he spent years thinking about and went through the best attorneys in the state. Caitlin, I suggest we meet and discuss this calmly, without emotion, like civilized people. Maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone. And if we don't, then the courts will decide. That threat sounded pretty clear. Brad, are you threatening me with a lawsuit? I'm warning you of the consequences. Family disputes over inheritance are unpleasant for all parties, especially the side with the weakest position. We're not weak. We have grounds for contestation, good lawyers, and the moral right to a fair distribution of the family estate. Good luck in the courts, Brad. I hung up and turned off the phone. My hands were shaking with anger and indignation. 5 days ago, these people were screaming at me that I was a failure and a disgrace to the family. And now, after hearing about the money, they suddenly remembered family values and fairness. But the worst part wasn't even their greed. The most disgusting thing was that they really believed they were entitled to my money. They thought that Grandpa was wrong to leave the inheritance to me and not to them. That I didn't deserve the money because I wasn't living the right lifestyle. An hour later, the phone rang again. Dad. Caitlin, please don't turn the phone off. We really need to talk. About what, Dad? About what happened? About the inheritance, about family, about the future. What kind of future do we have together after everything that's been said? Honey, family is forever. One fight can't break the family bond. One fight? Dad, you kicked me out of the house. We were upset, concerned about your future. Sometimes caring is expressed in the wrong way. Care in the form of yelling, "Get out!" Caitlin, we're sorry about what happened. We're truly sorry. But now we have a chance to make it right. What chance? A chance to be a real family, support each other, help each other, build a future together. With my money? This isn't about money. It's about family values. Dad, if Grandpa hadn't left me an inheritance, would you remember family values? Of course. Sooner or later we'd make up. When? A year from now? 10 years from now? Or when I agreed to quit photography and get a normal job? Caitlin, don't do this. We've always loved you. That's a very strange way to show love. Sometimes love requires tough decisions. We wanted you to understand the gravity of the situation. I do. I realize that my family is willing to disown me if I don't conform to their idea of the right life. That's not true. Then why did you only think of me today? After the news about the money? Pause. Dad clearly didn't know what to say. Caitlin, come here. Let's talk in person. Some things can't be discussed over the phone. I'm not coming. Why not? Because I don't trust you. Because I'm afraid you'll yell and kick me out again if I don't agree to give you the money. We won't yell, I promise. Your promises are worthless, Dad. 5 days ago, you promised a family dinner, and now you're doing a public execution. Caitlin, that's enough. I don't want to talk anymore. I hung up again, but the phone kept ringing. Mom, Amy, Brad, Dad again. They took turns calling, every 15 to 20 minutes, clearly coordinating their actions. By late afternoon, I counted 43 missed calls and 28 texts. The texts ranged from tearful requests for a meeting to poorly concealed threats. Amy wrote that the kids needed money for their education. Mom complained about health problems and expensive medical treatment. The father alluded to debts and financial difficulties. Brad argued about family justice and moral obligations. But most telling was a message that came late at night from Mom. "Caitlin, if you are not willing to go along with the family, we will have to defend our rights through the courts. Think of the consequences." They were indeed going to sue. The people who 5 days ago had called me a disgrace to the family were now demanding their share of an inheritance that didn't belong to them. But Grandpa had foreseen this development. There's a reason he asked me to keep it a secret for 6 months. It was not without reason that he wrote in his letter that his parents would oppose his decision. He knew his family better than I thought. Now I had to decide how to proceed. Compromise with people who only saw me as a source of money, or let them know that the days when they could dictate my living conditions were over forever. After a sleepless night spent pondering my family's ultimatums and threats, I made a decision. No compromises, no concessions to the people who had humiliated me for years and now had their hands out for my money. My grandfather had left me an inheritance for good reasons, and I wasn't about to betray his trust for the sake of repairing relationships with those who didn't deserve forgiveness. But mere rejection wasn't enough. I needed information. If the family was willing to go to court demanding a redistribution of the inheritance, I needed to know what I was dealing with. Their financial situation, their motives, their weaknesses. Grandpa always said that in any conflict, the winner is the one who is better prepared. On the morning of December 5th, I contacted Mr. Mitchell and asked for a recommendation for a good private investigator. The lawyer did not ask too many questions. Apparently, such requests from heirs were not uncommon. An hour later, I was already sitting in the detective agency's office, explaining to a young woman named Samantha Crawford what information I needed. "A family financial investigation," Samantha nodded, taking notes. "Pretty standard procedure. Income, expenses, loans, debts, hidden assets. Anything in particular you're interested in? Anything that might help them understand how desperate their situation is." "I see. These cases usually take a week or two, depending on the complexity of the financial structure. With the Harper family, given that one of the members is a prominent lawyer, it could take longer. Money's not the issue. I need the full picture." Samantha quoted a price for her services, and I agreed without hesitation. $5,000 for a detailed investigation was a ridiculous sum for a man whose bank account was now in the millions. While the detective handled the official investigation, I decided to conduct my own reconnaissance. In the age of social media and public databases, a lot of information could be found on your own if you knew where to look. My grandfather had taught me the basics of business analysis as a teenager when I helped him with his construction company's paperwork. Started with Brad. The law firm Richardson and Associates had a good reputation in Austin, but judging by the public records, things weren't as shiny as they wanted to portray. The number of clients had dropped 30% in the past 2 years, and several large corporate contracts had been lost to competitors. Digging deeper, I discovered that Brad had taken out a substantial loan to expand the office and hire additional employees just before the recession hit. The lukewarm loan of $800,000 was hanging dead weight on the firm, and the monthly payments were eating up most of the profits. Amy and Brad's home in an upscale neighborhood was also bought on credit. A $2,200,000 mortgage with monthly payments of about $15,000. With declining income from the practice of law, such expenses were bound to put a serious strain on the family budget. Even more interesting was the situation with his parents. Dad had long since retired. Mom had never worked full-time. Their house was technically paid off, but a year ago they took out a $300,000 loan against it. The official reason was to repair and improve the property. In practice, the money went to help Amy with the down payment on the house and to cover Brad's losses from a failed investment in a startup company. By the end of the week, I had a clear picture. A family that looked prosperous and financially stable a month ago was actually teetering on the brink of serious problems. Total debt exceeded $3 million, and income was falling due to problems in Brad's business. Samantha Crawford confirmed my findings and added a few savory details. It turned out that Brad had lost 2 major clients due to professional mistakes, one of which even led to a disciplinary proceeding with the Bar Association. Amy tried to find a job after a long break, but the banking market was oversaturated with specialists with more recent experience. Looked at objectively, the detective summarized, your family is in a pre-crisis state. At the current rate of spending and declining income, they have at most a year and a half before serious problems with debt repayment begin. So, an inheritance from Grandpa would be a lifesaver for them? Absolutely. $15 million would cover all their debts and ensure a comfortable life for years to come. Now I understood the source of their desperation. It wasn't just greed or envy of my unexpected wealth. It was a struggle for financial survival. They had counted on their grandfather's inheritance as a lifeline, but had received only modest sums that did not solve their problems. On the other hand, their financial difficulties explained much of their behavior in recent years. The constant criticism of my lifestyle, the persistent advice to find a stable job, the irritation that I was wasting my life. They were projecting their own fears of financial instability onto me, but that didn't excuse the way they treated me, and it certainly didn't give them the right to demand my money. Armed with the information, I began to plan a strategy. Simply refusing their demands wasn't enough. They'd already threatened legal action. I needed to show them that I was no longer the defenseless girl who could be intimidated by shouting and ultimatums. The first step was to move into the penthouse, symbolic and practical at the same time. I no longer wanted to live in a cramped apartment, saving every dollar. My grandfather had left me the opportunity to live beautifully, and I was going to take it. The move only took 1 day. I didn't have many possessions. A few boxes of clothes, photography equipment, personal belongings. Everything else, furniture, appliances, was left to the previous tenants as a gift. Why would I need an old sofa when the penthouse had designer furniture worth more than my annual income? The new apartment was changing my sense of self. Waking up with a view of the whole city, having breakfast at the panoramic windows, working in a professionally equipped photo studio, all this made the previous life look like a bad dream. I quickly became accustomed to luxuries that had previously seemed unattainable. The building's concierge, Mr. Anderson, treated me with a reverence I had never experienced before. The maid came twice a week. The cook could prepare any meal I ordered. The driver was ready to take me anywhere at any time. Services that once seemed fantastic were now commonplace. But the most important change was the inner transformation. For the first time in my life, I felt truly independent. I didn't have to count the money in my wallet before going to the store. I didn't have to turn down interesting projects because of low pay. I didn't have to endure humiliation from people who considered themselves superior to me. Meanwhile, the family never gave up trying to get in touch. Calls, texts, emails came every day. The tone ranged from tearful pleas to poorly concealed threats. Mom complained about her health and asked for, at least for treatment. Amy wrote about children who deserve a better future. Dad talked about family duty and gratitude to those who raised me, but the most persistent was Brad. His messages were written in a business-like style with legal terms and references to precedents. He explained in detail the grounds on which a will could be contested, the options available for a fair settlement. Behind the formal politeness was an iron determination to get things done. 2 weeks after the move, I received a formal letter from a law firm unrelated to Brad. The family had hired an outside lawyer to prepare a lawsuit to contest the will. The letter contained all the same arguments: unequal distribution, possible coercion, violation of equitable principles. Mr. Mitchell assured me that such lawsuits are rarely successful, especially if the will is properly drafted and the testator was of sound mind. But the litigation could drag on for years, cause a lot of trouble and ruin the reputations of all involved. Perhaps we should consider an out-of-court settlement, counselor suggested. A small concession on your part could quell the conflict. No concessions, I replied firmly. Grandfather left the will as he wanted it to be. I'm not going to go against his will. Then prepare for a long legal fight. I am. I actually had a plan that went beyond simply defending myself against a lawsuit. The information the detective had gathered gave me a significant advantage. I knew more about their financial problems than they realized. I knew what was behind their sudden concern for family justice, and I was going to use that knowledge. The first thing I did was contact the bank that had made the loan to Brad to expand his business. As a major customer of the bank, my deposit account was now one of the largest in the branch. I could count on certain privileges and information. The bank manager confirmed what I already knew. Brad's loan was listed in the bad debt category. Mr. Richardson regularly asks for deferred payments, the manager said confidentially. So far, we've been accommodating, given his reputation and previous relationships. But the bank's patience is not unlimited. The next step was to investigate the legal services market in Austin. It turned out that several of Brad's large corporate clients were dissatisfied with the quality of service and were considering changing legal representation. One phone call to the right person and a competing firm would have gotten information about Richardson and Associates' problems. But the most interesting discovery was the information about the parents' loans secured by the house. The money was borrowed from a small local bank where Grandpa had once been a major customer and board member. The current president of the bank remembered Grandpa and enthusiastically met with me. "Ms. Harper, I was a longtime friend of your grandfather's," the elderly banker said. "William often talked about you, very proud of your success in photography." "Thank you. I'd like to discuss some financial matters." "Of course. What can I do for you?" "I have information that my parents took out a home equity loan with your bank. Could you tell me the terms and conditions?" The banker hesitated. Customer financial information was confidential, but I wasn't just a curious daughter. I was the heiress of one of the bank's most esteemed customers and a potential major depositor myself. "Officially, I can't divulge details," he said cautiously. "But I can mention that the loan was at a rather high interest rate, considering the age of the borrowers and their limited income." "I see. What if someone wanted to repurchase the loan early?" "It is possible, but it requires the consent of the borrowers." "And if there is no consent? Then the loan remains in effect until it is repaid in full or until there is a default on payments." The picture was becoming clearer and clearer. I had leverage over every member of the family. The only question was how exactly to use it. In the evening, I sat in a chair by the penthouse window, looking out at the lights of the city and planning my next moves. The family thought they could force me to make concessions with threats of a lawsuit. What they didn't know was that I now had the opportunity to answer them with the same weapon. Grandpa didn't just leave me money, he gave me the power to never be a victim again. And I was going to take full advantage of that gift. The time for playing by their rules was over. I was making the rules now. The moment of truth came 3 weeks after I received official notice of the lawsuit. All this time, the family continued to bombard me with calls, texts, and emails from the lawyers, demanding a meeting for a civilized discussion. I remained silent, allowing them to believe that I had intimidated them with threats of litigation. In reality, I was preparing the final move in this game. On the morning of December 23rd, exactly 1 month after the family scandal that changed my life, I sent them all the same message. "Ready to meet and discuss the situation. Tonight, 6 p.m. Debrief my address. Central Tower, 41st floor penthouse. Come one and all." The response was instantaneous. The phone exploded with calls. They wanted to clarify details, discuss terms, agree on a constructive dialogue. I didn't answer a single call. Let them come with the expectations they had set for themselves. By 6 p.m., I was ready. A professional suit from the designer, bought in a boutique for $5,000. Jewelry that once seemed like an unattainable luxury. Makeup and hair done by the best masters in town. I looked like a successful businesswoman, not the poor relative they were used to seeing. The penthouse was prepared for the meeting. Soft lighting emphasized the luxury of the interior. Panoramic windows overlooked the entire Austin, glittering with lights. On the coffee table were documents, the results of a detective investigation, bank statements, legal opinions. Everything that would show the family the real state of affairs. The first to arrive were the parents. Mother in her best dress, father in a suit he wore only on special occasions. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, hope, and poorly concealed amazement at the luxury of my new home. "Caitlin, darling," Mom tried to hug me, but I pulled away. "Come in, sit down." They looked around with their mouths open. The designer furniture, the artwork on the walls, the view from the windows, it all screamed money, big money. "Do you live here?" Dad asked in surprise. "Yes, it was a gift from my grandfather." "A gift?" Mom asked. "But we didn't know anything." "There's a lot you didn't know." A few minutes later, Amy and Brad arrived. My sister was dressed with the kind of deliberate elegance that was supposed to demonstrate her status as the wife of a successful lawyer. Brad looked confident, clearly counting on his legal skills to help control the situation. "Wow," Amy said, looking around the penthouse. "Nice place. Thanks for the appraisal." "Caitlin," Brad interjected in a businesslike tone, "thank you for agreeing to the meeting. We hope we can resolve the situation without unnecessary conflict." "I hope so, too." They settled into the living room, and I could see their gazes roaming the room, assessing the value of the furnishings. Mom was looking at the paintings on the walls, Amy was studying the designer furniture, and Dad was staring out the panoramic windows. Brad pretended not to be impressed by the luxury, but I could see him sneakily snapping pictures of the interior on his phone. "So," Brad began, "we're here to discuss the current inheritance situation. I think everyone realizes that family conflict is not good for anyone." "I agree." "Good, good. Then let's talk about options for a fair resolution." "Let's do that. But first, I just want to get one thing straight." I grabbed a file from the table. "I've been thinking a lot about our family over the last few weeks, about what's happened over the last few years, and I've been doing a little research." "What kind of research?" Brad was wary. "Financial. I wondered why you'd suddenly thought of family values after the news of the inheritance." I opened the folder and spread the documents out on the table. "Brad, your law firm is in a pre-crisis state. An $800,000 loan, a 30% drop in revenue over the last 2 years, loss of key clients." Brad's face went pale. "How did you—" "Amy, you and your husband took out a $2,200,000 mortgage. At your current household income, those payments are eating up the lion's share of the budget." Amy opened her mouth but didn't say a word. "Mom, Dad, a year ago you took out a $300,000 mortgage on the house. The money went to help Amy with the down payment and to cover Brad's losses from the failed investment." "Caitlin," Dad tried to intervene, "this is our private business. It becomes my business when you demand my money. The family's total debt exceeds $3 million. Your financial situation is catastrophic." "How dare you pry into our business?" Amy exclaimed. "Just as you dare to demand a redistribution of the inheritance that is rightfully mine." There was a tense silence. The family clearly hadn't expected me to be so well informed about their problems. "Okay," Brad said, trying to take control of the situation. "Let's say we're having financial difficulties. That doesn't change the fact that Grandpa's will isn't fair." "Why unfair?" "Because he left a huge sum to someone who doesn't need that kind of money, and virtually nothing to those with real financial needs." "Doesn't need?" I laughed. "A month ago you were screaming that I was living in poverty and dishonoring my family. And now you claim I don't need money?" "You need a reasonable amount," Mom interjected. "But not 15 million? That's absurd." "What's absurd is your greed. Grandpa left me that money because he knew that you only see me as a source of trouble." "That's not true," Amy exclaimed. "We've always cared for you." "Cared?" I stood up and walked to the window. "For years they told me that my work wasn't serious, compared me to Amy and found me unworthy, shamed me in front of my friends, and a month ago, they kicked me out of the house. We were emotional. You were honest. For the first time in years, you said what you really thought." "Caitlin," Dad said softly, "families fight sometimes, but that doesn't mean that love disappears." "What kind of love, Dad? The kind that only comes after news of money? It has nothing to do with money." "Then why haven't you called or texted me in the 5 days leading up to today? Why did you only think of me after you heard about the inheritance? No one answered. The truth was too obvious. Caitlin, Brad tried a different approach. Let's put emotions aside and talk practically. You have money, we have problems. You can help the family. I can, but I don't want to. Why not? Because you don't deserve my help. We're your family, shouted Amy. The family that kicked me out of the house? Who made me feel like a failure for years? Who was ashamed of my lifestyle? We were wrong. Of course we were wrong, but only after it turned out I was richer than all of you put together. I went back to the desk and picked up another document. You want to know what I've decided to do with Grandpa's money? What? Mom asked with hope in her voice. I will create a fund to support young artists and photographers. I'm going to help those who do creative work against the family's opinion. Those who are not understood and supported by their relatives. You're giving our money to strangers? Amy gasped. My money, and not to strangers, but to people who need it more than my greedy family. Kathleen, think about what you're doing, Mom exclaimed. We can fix this. Fix what exactly? Years of humiliation, the constant pressure? Trying to break me down and make me live by your rules? We wanted the best for you. You wanted me to be like Amy. Successful, rich, ordinary, but I'm not Amy, and I don't want to be. Brad got up from his seat. Caitlin, if you refuse to settle, we'll sue, and we'll win. On what grounds? Compulsion to make a will. We have witnesses to your influence on Grandpa over the last few years. What kind of witnesses? The nurses who took care of him, neighbors, people who saw your relationship. Did you see how I spent time with Grandpa? How I listened to his stories? How I helped around the house? Terribly coercive behavior. They saw how you turned him against the family. I never turned Grandpa against you. I was just honest with him about how you felt about me. I took the last document from the table. Brad, while you're on the subject of court, here's something to think about. Tomorrow morning, the bank will receive information about your financial problems from an independent source. Your credit will be placed in the critical debt category. Brad's face turned gray. You can't. I can. And that's not all. Your corporate clients will find out about the bar disciplinary proceedings. It'll get out to the competition. That's blackmail. That's the consequences of your actions. I turned to my parents. Mom, Dad, your bank will also get some interesting information. That the loan was taken out under false pretenses, not to fix up the house, but to help the kids. Caitlin, what are you up to? Mom whispered. I'm showing you that the days when you could dictate terms to me are over forever. You're going to destroy our family. I'm freeing myself from a toxic family. Amy burst into tears. I have children. They need an education, a future. You should have thought of that before you kicked me out of the house. We can fix this. Apologize. Start over. No, you can't. Because your apology isn't motivated by remorse. It's motivated by a need for money. The father made one last attempt to appeal to family sentiment. Caitlin, my daughter, please. We're your parents. We love you. Parents love their children unconditionally, and you have conditioned every day of my life. We were wrong. We're ready to admit our mistakes. It's too late. I grabbed the remote and turned on the music system. A soft melody filled the room. The evening is over. You may go. Caitlin, wait. There's nothing to wait for. Your demands have been answered. We're not going to let it go, Brad shouted. We'll sue. We'll contest the will. Do it. I've got money for the best lawyers in the country, and you have debts and problems that will become public tomorrow. The family slowly rose from their seats. In their eyes, I saw shock, anger, despair. They had come here hoping for a compromise, but what they got was the final verdict. This isn't over, Amy hissed at the door. It is for me. For you, it's the beginning of a life without my money and without me. They left, leaving me alone in the silence of the penthouse. I stood at the panoramic windows and looked out at the lights of the city, feeling incredibly light. The weight of years of obligation to a family that didn't appreciate me was finally gone. The next day, I made good on my promises. Information about Brad's financial problems had gotten to the right people. His credit was indeed reclassified, and corporate clients started asking uncomfortable questions. The parents' bank got wind of the misuse of loan proceeds. The family tried to contact me for a few more days, but I didn't answer the phone. The threats of litigation gradually subsided. Apparently, the lawyers had explained to them that there was little chance of success, especially in their current financial situation. A month later, I learned that Brad had been forced to close his firm and take a job with a former competitor. Amy found a job at a bank as a junior manager. My parents sold the house and moved to more modest accommodations. Do I feel sorry for them? Sometimes. But then I think back to that Thanksgiving dinner, the shouts of, "Get out!" the years of constant criticism and attempts to break my will. And I realize my grandfather was right to let me live without their approval. I did create a fund to support young artists. In the first year, we helped 100 talented people who were not understood by their families. Seeing their gratitude, their successes, their freedom from other people's expectations was worth any money. My photography changed too. Without financial pressure, I could only choose projects that inspired me. Documentary shoots, art projects, traveling in search of unique shots. My first solo exhibition was a huge success. You know what the most surprising thing was? It turned out that freedom from family pressure not only changed my life, but made me a better person. I stopped making excuses for my choices, stopped seeking other people's approval, and gained confidence in myself. Sometimes I think about that alternative scenario where I would have compromised, given my family some of the money, tried to rebuild the relationship. And I realize that would be a betrayal of my grandfather and myself. The money would run out and the family dynamic would remain the same. Grandpa didn't just give me an inheritance, he gave me the opportunity to be myself without regard for other people's opinions. And I am grateful to him every day of my new life. If you've read this far, it means my story has touched you. Give this post a like if you think that family money should not be a reason for blackmail. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more stories of people finding the strength to change their lives. Write in the comments if you've faced similar pressure from relatives. Your experience may help others. And if you have your own story of fighting for the right to live your own way, share it. Maybe your story will inspire someone to change. Remember, no one has the right to dictate how you live your life, even if that someone is your family. Sometimes the right thing to do is to walk away and never look back.